All right, well, it looks like it's that time of year once again where I jump back in and revisit Warframe. Like with a handful of other MMOs and live service games, I try to return and check these out to see the most recent updates, at least around once a year. And well, Warframe just got a pretty large update. The Devere paradox, which released back on April 26, introduced an entirely new way to play this game. Basically, at its core, they've added an open world roguelike system to Warframe. So you play as the Drifter, you make your way through what are called the lands of Devere on foot, by horseback, or as one of the game's many available frames. So this update introduces a 2 to 3 hour story campaign, after which you unlock 3 separate brand new game modes that offer a bunch of repeatable content that keeps itself fresh thanks to the randomness of this new roguelike mechanic. Basically, it's this thing of a system called decrees that provide significant boost to your character's damage, defenses, and movement. And then as you continue to farm decrees, you just get stronger and stronger, letting you push further and take on new challenges. They've also updated the combat as well, adding some more depth and making playing as the Drifter feel a lot more like a traditional action combat game with things like blocks, parries, special attacks, and even counters. And just all around, this is basically like a real interesting new twist on Warframe. Now, this video is sponsored by Digital Extremes. They reached out to me and asked me to basically just get some hands-on time and share with you and show you what the Devere paradox is all about. So I played for several hours now. I've got a pretty good grasp on things, and I'm gonna introduce you to the various new systems and mechanics that come in the Devere paradox. I mean, this is a real easy, kind of a no-brainer, one of those sponsorships for me because I like Warframe. Like I said, I come back about once a year. I like checking out the new updates, and even more so, it's like totally free. Brand new, ton of new stuff that's totally available for free. Anyone can jump in, even if it's your first time with Warframe, for a total of $0. So anyway, let's jump in and check out and learn more about the Devere paradox. So whether you are a returning seasoned player or playing for the very first time, the update begins with you playing through that brand new story campaign. Like I mentioned, this is going to take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, really depending on how much exploration and side content you decide to do along the way. Besides the story, which does include a lot of narration as you play through, as well as some cutscenes here and there, the campaign also acts as kind of like a lengthy tutorial for all of these newly added mechanics, systems, and features. So you start off by running through a combat simulation. This is where you learn the Drifter's various combat moves, including some of the new stuff he's got. So there's the basics, like there's light and heavy attacks, there's blocking and dodging, there's also a target lock feature, letting you focus on an enemy. Then you've also got things like the quick shot, where you can fire your pistol even if you're equipped with the melee weapon, and this shot can be used to counter special enemy attacks or charged attacks. There's the power strike, which is not the same as a heavy attack. It's like a stronger special attack, varies depending on the weapon that you're using. So the base Drifter weapon that you start off with in this update is called Sun and Moon, and its power attack is like this ranged slash that deals heavy damage and also passes through enemies, kind of acts as like a projectile attack. And then you've also got now a parry, so you can, like most parries, you can time your block. If you do it right before an enemy attack lands, prevents that attack from dealing damage, but it also opens them up for a finisher. And this parry, this can also be used to reflect ranged attacks back at enemies. You're also introduced to this mount called Kaith. It is a flying steed. You will use this for traversing what is a fairly large open world, and it's actually made up of like these floating islands. So you can go on ground, you can fly in the air, and basically go wherever you want. Almost immediately after starting the update, you unlock this pretty early on. So it starts with some basic story stuff, and then it moves you through, introducing you to the various open world objectives, as well as the decree system. So all throughout the open world in Devere, there is a large variety of objective types that you can engage with outside of what you like your main objective, the main quest line that you have. And these consist of a range of different combat and non-combat activities. So there's a bunch of different mini games, like trying to guide a mirror image of yourself to these beams of light, or there's one where you control this eel-like creature and you move them through water, feeding them fish before a timer runs out. There's ones where you can play songs on musical instruments. There are races as you pass through these markers on your mount. There's even ones where you try to herd wildlife into a pen. Some combat encounters, pretty basic stuff like eliminate a group of enemies to rescue prisoners, or assemble this shrine, which requires you to kill a bunch of enemies and then collect the things that they drop. And then there'll be ones that are just like, hey, fight this really tough enemy. There's also a variety of different puzzles to solve. So there are ones where you have to like open up these chests by timing clicks on this rotating spinning orb, or reconnect power lines by attacking these floating artifacts and then trying to find the next one in the chain and progress it all the way down to power up a a particular structure. Above ground, it's pretty simple because you can see all the connections, but there are even some below ground in caves, and it requires a little bit more navigation and searching around for the next marker in the chain. And each and every one of these side objectives will reward you with some useful resources, but even more so, they let you pick from an assortment of decrees. And these decrees are basically like the roguelike, the first bit of the roguelike nature of Devere. So basically, these are upgrades that will make both the Drifter and the Warframe more powerful. They'll enhance you with an array of different powers that will last for the entirety of your current run. So when you're playing through the campaign, there's reset points, but they'll last for a big duration of time. And then when you're playing through those additional modes, which we'll get to in a minute, they will last for the entire run of whatever mode that you're in. So there's actually somewhere around 40 different decrees in total. I'm not going to read all of them off to you, but here's some of my favorites and the ones that I tended to pick most often. So there's like the Smoldering Strike, which will make it so that melee attacks become imbued with fire, dealing a percentage increase in heat damage. Or there's Majestic Strike, which makes it so that every melee attack hits 2 times. There's Greedy Heal, which makes it so that you restore health when you kill enemies. Dueler's Outburst makes it so that on critical hits, you'll gain a melee increased attack speed. Ranger's Reload will have you reload your weapon anytime you roll, which is great. You can just constantly roll and shoot, roll and shoot. And then finally, to top it all off, one of my favorite to pick up was Fleet-Footed, which made it so that for every single decree you collected, it would increase your movement speed by 10%. This ended up getting ridiculous as I continue to play, especially on runs that were longer, and I would get more and more decrees. I would keep farming up decrees, and eventually my run speed was like way faster than my mount speed. It's kind of hilarious. So many of these decrees will also have multiple tiers, so you can stack them, making them increasingly stronger. And then there will also be like rare versions of the decrees, which grant even larger buffs than the regular versions. And just like a lot of roguelike games or games that have roguelike systems in it, you just go around, you do things to unlock these, and then you try to, based on the hand that you're dealt, essentially try to make a build or tailor your playstyle to whatever particular weapons and melee weapons and range weapons and Warframe that you happen to be using. And speaking of the Warframe, the Drifter playstyle isn't the only thing that you're doing here. You do actually pick a frame early on in the story that will carry throughout with you, but then there's also a random assortment of frames to pick from those various modes. That actually comes into play when it comes to this system known as the Undercroft. So as you're going through, you're doing the narrative, you're doing some of the side quests. Occasionally, some of those main and or side quests will take you to a location known as the Undercroft, and this is where you just basically automatically swap from playing as the Drifter to playing as your selected Warframe for that run. And it basically just throws you back into the traditional Warframe play style. You are playing as a Warframe, and you're doing those core Warframe objectives, some of which have been in the game for like the past 10 years or so. This includes things like Exterminate, where you've got to kill a certain number of enemies, Defense, where you have to defend against 5 waves of attacks, Survival, where you have to survive for 5 minutes, and then there's also things like Excavation, where you got to excavate these crystals from the ground, or Void Flood, where you have to seal these things known as ruptures by bringing in an artifact that you charge to them, which then fuels them, fills them up, and you do that 5 times, and that's the end of the mission. And just like side objectives, going into these Undercroft missions will also reward you with resources, as well as yet another decree upgrade to pick, powering you up for your run. So you'll go through 2 to 3 hours, you'll get the narrative, you'll learn all of these systems, and eventually you will finish the campaign. Not going to spoil the story for you here, I'll let you see it for yourself. But at that point, you're basically kicked back into the time loop, which then opens up 3 new game modes. These are the Devere Experience, the Circuit, and the Lone Story. And this is basically a bulk of what this update is going to provide for replayability in the long haul. So starting off with the Devere Experience, this is basically the core of the game and includes all of the new systems and features. It's got that open landscape for you to explore. It's got the story woven into it, all of the side activities available in the open world, all of the exploration. Speaking of which, this open world landscape, there's a lot of little things to discover, a lot of little nooks and crannies, hidden puzzles, even hidden resources that you can use to fuel yourself up for the long-term progression, like the long-term roguelike progression system that carries with you between runs. There's actually quite a lot here to be discovered. It's a rather dense landscape landscape with a lot of things basically everywhere you look. So this is, yeah, the Devere experience, the center mode is like the core. Then there's also the circuit, and this is focused just on Warframe combat. The Drifter is not involved here. Keep in mind, the Warframes each have their own playstyle. They act as basically classes, and the Drifter is its entirely different thing. It's kind of, again, more akin to a slower paced action combat game. So going into the circuit though, this revolves around playing as a selected Warframe and going on these endless gameplay objective loops that will rotate different weekly rewards that you farm for. So basically you pick a difficulty, you pick a reward track, which will be just one of 3 randomly selected frames for that week, and then you fill up the track claiming rewards along the way. And essentially this is just a great way to unlock brand new Warframes to play in your account. And then the third mode is called the Lone Story, and this is basically the Devere experience, but just the story missions and none of the side objectives. I don't really see the point in doing this. The 2 main ones that I've been playing the most were the Devere experience and the circuit. But whichever one of these 3 different modes that you want to pick once you unlock the campaign, all of them start off in the same place. You go to this cave, which has you picking from a random assortment of tools, essentially. So this is where you start off. You select from a random assortment of Warframes. You'll start with 3 available to you, and then through unlocking some of the longer term progression, you can eventually get more. You go up to one of the 3 frames that you see to start, and then you select from the different mods that they have available, and you basically just pick the frame that you want to use for that run. You then also have to go pick your weapons, the primary, melee, and secondary weapons. And then there's also the long-term progression of what are called the Drifter Intrinsics. These essentially provide you with additional buffs that will enhance various aspects of the combat, of your defenses or endurance, of your riding capabilities. And then the final one, called Opportunity, is basically the system that allows you to power up and get more powerful and more options when it comes to the decree system. There's also some spots for customization here. You can customize the appearance of your Drifter and Warframe in this mirror, and then your mount is also in the cave, and you can go up to the mount and customize the appearance, the cosmetics, the skins, the colors, all of that. So again, remember, all of this is revolved around like the structure of a roguelike. So if you start off with the Devere experience, that gameplay mode, very first thing you do is you go into the cave, you pick which of the random assortment of Warframes you want, you pick from the random assortment of weapons, primary, secondary, and melee, and then if you have the resources, you go into the intrinsics and you try to power those up. The intrinsic resource you will just get while you're playing all of this stuff, and as you continue to accumulate it, you can then specialize your long-term account progression for the Devere paradox and those various modes. So the Devere experience, like I said, this is actually the kind of the core. It includes all of everything that the Devere brings to the table, all of the new stuff. After you go into the cave and you pick from your assortment of stuff, you are then dropped into the open world and you are just asked to complete a string of 6 main objectives. And you can do this at whatever pace you want. You could go straight from one to the other, make your way all the way to the end, or you can spend a bunch of time exploring the open world and doing side tasks. And the main reason you want to do that is to farm decrees, making yourself ever more powerful. But you can also farm resources and farm currencies and farm a whole lot of other stuff that you just want to use in Warframe in general. It's really totally up to you. And basically, I found that while I was playing through this, sometimes I would beeline, I would go through the 6 core objectives, moving from one to the next. Sometimes I would do a ton of side objectives and really try to power myself up by stacking a ton of different decrees. And sometimes I would explore and I'd go around and I'd find various currencies, I'd farm resources, I'd fight all the little enemies scattered around, bosses. There's also NPCs all around the world and you can chat with them, get some of the backstory and lore behind the Devere paradox. It's just a rather interesting space to explore, and there's again quite a bit of variety all within this one system. And then at some point, whenever you decide that you're done exploring, you're done stacking decrees, you're done doing side objectives, collecting resources, at some point you will finish the 6th, the final objective, at which point you are then asked to summon in this massive flying worm, and this plays into the final conclusion of a run. You'll fly to the worm on your flying mount, dodging projectiles. You can even shoot these and they create these pockets where if you pass through them, you get a massive speed boost that'll let you catch up to the worm. And then once you get close, you're able to just do a basic attack because you have a new weapon, and this lets you mount onto the side of the worm. And then you've got to jump and reattach, trying to dodge some damage rings here and there. You go all the way to the front of the worm, you climb on top, and then you take control, you shoot the stuff out of the sky, you steer him into a massive portal, and then you have like what's a boss fight. Pretty straightforward. The worm just moves around. There's a bunch of AoE. You just have to shoot these target weak point markers on the worm, and then in 3 stages, you'll summon in some minions that you also have to deal with. But the fight's pretty straightforward, but it just acts as like a culmination to a run through the Devere experience. And then once you finish the boss, you go back into the time loop and you start all over. And this is really the rogue system. You do another run, you're back in the cave, you pick from your random assortment of warframes and weapons, you power up some of that long-term progression if you have more resource, you jump back in, boom. Now you go through 6 new random objectives and do side stuff if you want, summon the worm, defeat the worm, get kicked back out, go back into the cave again and again and again and again. Now when it comes to the circuit, I have done this a little bit, but definitely the Devere experience is what I spent the most time with. The circuit is just you playing as base Warframe, basically. You still go through the cave and you still pick from the random assortment of frames and weapons, but then you're just constantly playing as the Warframe the whole time, and you're doing those basic Warframe objectives, moving from one to the next. Again, those are like the defend, the exterminate, the survival, the excavation, and the void flood, and you're just continuously moving through those basically, and you can keep pushing further and further for more and more rewards. It seems like for people who are more into the core Warframe experience, this is going to be a really great way to unlock a whole bunch of new frames potentially just by running through the circuit. And the lone story, again, that's just the story stuff. I didn't really focus on it. Now there is one additional layer to this, and that is the layer of what are called spirals. These are what they consider lore-wise like the different moods of Devere. So they're divided into these 5 moods of joy, anger, envy, sorrow, and fear. These will rotate every 2 hours. Whatever one that you happen to be in at the moment, it just brings its own changes to the world when you're playing through the Devere experience. It basically just determines what the narrative is going to be, what the tone of the open world is going to be, but it also imbues the enemies within that world with a new suite of unique attacks depending on what 5 of the ones that it's currently on, as well as a specific elemental damage type with one associated for each of those 5 moods. So again, it's just yet another layer onto this roguelike experience to help keep things fresh by constantly rotating through these 5 different styles. All in all, it really is interesting. This update brings again another brand new way to play Warframe essentially. I actually do really quite enjoy that base mode of Devere experience, and I found that playing as the Drifter is a nice change of pace for the base game. It kind of slows things down a little bit compared to when you're playing as a Warframe. And that added layer of roguelike mechanics with the decree system, with the open world and all of those side objectives and the exploration that comes with it. Just another layer added onto Warframe. This game has gotten so many updates over the years. I've been playing Warframe on and off since it was it was like alpha or beta back in like 2012. Like I've been revisiting this game for a long time, for many, many years, and it's always crazy to me how much things change year after year, especially when we get rather substantial updates like what we're seeing here with the Devere paradox. So again, if you're interested in learning more and checking out the Devere paradox for yourself, go ahead and use my link below. Once more, this is a completely free update. You don't have to pay for anything, and Warframe itself is free. So even if you've never touched this game and you like what you've seen here, you're interested in checking it out, you can do so at 0 cost. Use my link below, but also if you use the promo code that's down there in description, you can get yourself a nice premium bonus starter kit. And with that, that'll do it for today. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this look at the Devere paradox. Until next time, I'll see you later.